you all doing? Just going to put my head around this. So I'm from the Men's Development Network, and you'll see there, I'm going to talk about the White Ribbon, the Turn Off the Red Light campaign, and our MEND programs in 10 minutes. So I'm going to talk fast. Just see if I can do this. Sorry now. Is that most of the time to? Yeah. So ending violence against women imposed by men. We used to call it ending men's violence against women, and Mary Robertson she suggested this change imposed by men, basically so that men wasn't in the front of the acronym, which I think is fair enough. And we started the work in 2000, built up alliances. I'll talk a bit more about this with women's organisations. We're supported by the Department of Justice and CUSC. NTMAC is the National Traveller Monitoring and Advisory Committee, and we're on a group there about addressing domestic violence in the travelling community, and TUSLA is the Child and Family Agency. And then we're also members of the European Institute of Gender Equality, the Fundamental Rights Platform, and Men Engaged, an international men's organisation for ending violence against women. And I'm going to talk to you about the White Ribbon campaign and Turn Off the Red Light. And the reason why we do the work is we want better lives for men, and which we see as leading to better lives for all, because if men get a better sense of ourselves, then we can have better relationships. Now, I don't see any arrows anymore. Let's move on. Well, these are some of the figures from last year underlying men's violence against women. You'll see that some of them are from the Rape Crisis Network of Ireland, whose office is here in Galway, and from Safe Ireland, who are in Athlone, Women's Aid, are in Dublin, but they run a national service there. So you'll see there 90% of perpetrators were known to the women they raped, 21% of perpetrators of sexual violence against adult females were partners or ex-partners, and so on. We don't want to start there. Every year, Safe Ireland do a one-day survey in November, so 537 women were looking for support from a domestic violence service last November. They do it at the beginning of November. And so the Fundamental Rights Agency, that I mentioned, did a Europe-wide survey, piece of research, and the 1 in 5 women figure is about average right across Europe. So we're trying to raise men's awareness in colleges, you see here, so that's why I'm here tonight, and in schools, with the trade unions, the Defence Forces, sports organisations, business, and other NGOs as well. We're in alliances with them. But you'll find that most of those organisations, not all of them, have equality statements and safety statements. And that's a really good way in, is to go in and say, well, what is your equality statement? What's your equality policy? What's your safety statement here? And then insist that they work to that. This is our flyer for last year. So White Ribbon Day is on the 25th of November every year. Though actually that's probably going to vary this year for strategic reasons, but it will be in November, and other parts of the world it's sometimes in December. But the UN nominated the 25th of November as the day to end violence, for ending violence against women, and then the 16 days of action that run from there to the 10th of December, which is UN designated International Human Rights Day. So across those 16 days, there's lots of events highlighting violence against women, men's violence against women, and ending it. Just to say about the White Ribbon campaign, it's about ending men's violence against women, and men wearing this to say that that's what we're about. But the second half of the sentence is, and promoting gender equality. So the two bits are in it, and there's various speakers. I don't know how you can read that, but the guy at the top there is the GAA, then the Irish Nurse and Midwives Organisation. Sarah Gorry is working on ending sexting, the text hassle stuff, bullying. Miriam O'Callaghan opens it for us every year. This was Captain Deirdre Carvery from the Defence Forces and Sandra Healy from Vodafone. Rebecca Began is our Turn Off the Red Light campaign coordinator. And this is Ian Fricha, who exited prostitution a number of years ago and is testifying to the British government and Westminster today. She's we work with her on the Turn Off the Red Light campaign because they're trying to change the law there as well. Publicity-wise, we put, one of the things we do is put posters all over the country, and then we ask people to photograph them and send them in to us. And this is one on Tower Street, Dart Station in Dublin that someone saw. We got a few in last year. And then we asked men that men admire are the dark photographs against the light. But Mahon and we're hurting did a video for us calling on men to wear the white ribbon. I should say the IMO, if you go on our White Ribbon website, which is whiteribbon.ie, the Irish Nurse and Midwife Organisation did 3 videos for us, and they're absolutely powerful because they're the leaders of that union, talk about when they were nurses in A&E and what they experienced women coming in with injuries and with mental and physical health issues from men's violence. This is actually an older team. I didn't have the most recent one. The FEI do a friendly match for us every year and highlight the issue. They put it up on the big screen, they announce it and say that this match is in aid of the White Ribbon and to promote the White Ribbon campaign. And Martin and Roy, that was actually their first match, and you can see on Martin's lapel and just slightly on Roy's that they were wearing the White Ribbon that day. The whole management team wore it. And we got these 2 boys, Paul Collins, to wear it as well. Or to hold the white ribbon. They weren't actually allowed to wear it because the interesting thing is that their shirts are contracted out, so you actually they can't put on other insignia. So whatever's on them is what's paid for. So they're allowed to hold. There's Miriam launching it for us. And this is, we had it in the round room of the Rotunda Hospital in Dublin this year. And you can see Francis Fitzgerald in the blue, who probably no longer to be our Minister for Justice if things don't work out, but we'll see. And there are all the other speakers, and these are what we call ambassadors. So we get them to take on the campaign. But also then this year we got them to stand up and say, after they've been ambassadors now for nearly 6 years, what have they done and where have they brought it and so on. And the GAA, and also what commitment they're giving us going forward as well. The woman Fiona Hart, who is the stadium manager of Croke Park, abseiled 80 feet off the top of the stand and raised money for us. And this year we're going to put that video, it was videoed, and we're going to put that around all the GAA clubs and so to raise their awareness and to get them to support the campaign. So we've got the Guards and the Army on board as well. And here are all the trade unions. So you've got SATU, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, the secondary teachers, and the INMO that I mentioned. And Martin Collins and Pavy Point. So Pavy Point have taken that's the Travellers organisation. They've taken a fantastic lead in this now. And we've just trained 8 Traveller men before Christmas. And one of them, halfway through the training, Patrick Riley, stood up at that event that I showed you with Francis Fitzgerald and spoke about tackling domestic violence in the traveller community. It was absolutely brilliant every time. I'd show you a video, but it's probably up on our website as well. Check and see. And this is just a group of men at one of those events wearing the white ribbon on the day. Turn Off the Red Light then is it's a campaign to end prostitution, sex trafficking, criminalise the purchase of sex, decriminalise the woman who's being sold or is selling herself for sex, so that she's not criminalised, and change the legislation. The Sexual Offences Bill got as far as the 2nd stage in the Dáil just 2 days before the election was called. I think it was on the Thursday, the election was called the Tuesday or Wednesday after that. It's got to go through 3 more stages. It has all party support. It's a brilliant bill around protecting children, women and men from sexual abuse and sexual offences, and it has this piece in it as well, so it's well worth looking at. And we want to obviously change the attitude of men to prostitution, and this is a group of men, mostly men, though right in the middle is Rachel Moore, who also exited prostitution a number of years ago, has written a fantastic book, and is basically now has become an international promoter of changing legislation. And by the way, the legislation was changed in Northern Ireland last year in July. They brought it in, so they've had 6 or 8 months of it there. So we wanted all Ireland then. And obviously it's the Scandinavian countries, of course, are ahead on this, and they've had it in Sweden for over 10 years. It's working well. France is getting close to it as well, and Canada. I won't go through all this, but just to say, we work the way we work with men, but we're one of there's 73 civil society organisations now in the Turn Off the Red Light campaign. I just list some of them there. But just on the statistic, 1 in 50 men by sex. Now, the women's organisations, to give them the due, always say, well, then that means 40 out of 50 men do not buy sex, which is good. But when you divide, in a general sort of way, the population of men in Ireland, and you say, well, 1 in 50 of them buy sex, you could fill Croke Park. It's about 85,000 men. by sex in Ireland. There's 1,000 women for sale in Ireland every day on the internet for sex. And it's mostly professional, married men in their 30s with children, and they buy women at lunchtime on the way home from work. That's what the figures would show. And as I said there about the minister expected to get it through, but she didn't quite. Our MEND programme, Ending Domestic Abuse, with various posters there, and I won't go through this in detail, just to say that a wonderful woman called Fran O'Grady, who was the childcare trainer in the Southeastern Health Board, it probably was then, in 2000, sent around an invitation. 200 organisations came. And after 3 years of talking about it, they asked us, the women's organisations asked us to take on the coordination of the perpetrator intervention programme, basically working with men who use violence against women. And we've done that now since 2003. We've 5 of these programmes going, and with the women's refuges, the Rape Crisis Centre, women from the Rape Crisis Centre, and women from the women's centres, including Women's Aid in Carroll, for instance, they provide partner support to the women, so the women can get one-to-one support or get phone support or group support. And that means they can report back in on how their men are doing, whether they are changing or not, and then that's reported back in confidentially to the facilitators. They meet the partner support workers, and then they know whether the guys are telling the truth when they report back in each week. It's a 32-week programme. And then we support the women through the partner support for 6 months afterwards to see if the change holds. And they've always got the phone number after that to ring in if anything changes. Now also loads of women have managed to have said, I don't intend to do with them anymore, and they've safely managed to get him out or move away themselves, whichever they preferred. Okay, and that's us, the Men's Development Network. And just to say that why we're called the Men's Development Network is we thought many years ago as men, a group of us, that men needed to develop. We needed to develop our awareness of these sort of issues, but also of ourselves, and that male gender conditioning sort of tightens things for us. It makes it very difficult for us, for instance, to express our emotions, to express ourselves clearly, to build good relationships and so on. There's loads of pressures on young men especially, and it happens when we're boys on. So we sat in groups and talked about these things, and then the issue of other issues like education and health and violence came out of that. And that's why we ended up here. Thanks.
Thank you. It's really good. Now, over to you, Jackie.
Okay. Hi everybody. My name is Jackie Carroll, and I'm a domestic violence outreach worker with Waterside House, which is our local refuge here in Galway. And I'm afraid I don't have any slides ready. Sorry about that, guys. I suppose just to follow on from what Alan was saying, for me, working in this area, in this sector as long as I have, it's really, really refreshing to see men, getting involved in this as a campaign, because it shouldn't be just a woman's issue. This is an issue that affects all of society, and our brothers and sons, and our daughters, and everybody. So that's really refreshing. I just want to say that, and to just commend the work that you do. I'm just going to talk about us here locally in Galway. The refuge is located just beside the courthouse, for any of you who don't know. And last year, in 2015, we dealt with 380 individual women. So they would have used a combination of service from the refuge to the outreach service to our counselling service. The refuge also dealt with 560 children. So that's, when you're dealing with women, inevitably you're going to end up working with the children as well. And there were 780 outreach appointments provided in Galway City and County to 341 women. So my role in the refuge is as an outreach worker, which means that I don't actually work directly with the women staying there. I work with women who have chosen not to come in and stay in a refuge, or who can't come in and stay in a refuge, but they would still want support and information. So what I would do, and I kind of it's very much led by the woman herself. So we can get a woman coming into the service who might walk in this morning and say, right, I've had enough, I want to get a barring order, how do I do that? And we would help her through that process. We would help her to gather evidence, we would go to the court with her, we would help her to secure legal aid or find a solicitor, and just go through that whole process with her. But you might also get somebody who walks in our door and goes, I'm not sure if this is the right service for me, I think I might be in an abusive relationship. This would be particularly true of women where there isn't physical abuse. So there might be a lot of control, and they might feel, a lot of women would say, I feel like I might be going crazy, I'm not sure if it's me, what's going on. And so that would be a kind of a longer term process where you're exploring the relationship and you're looking at what we would call the dynamics of abuse. So we're very clear in the refuge that domestic abuse isn't just about violence, and in quite a lot of cases there can be very serious levels of control in families, and so we work very closely with that as well. Another big part of what we do is, why I'm here tonight, is to raise awareness, and we also provide a lot of training. So we've been linked with the university for quite a number of years now, in particular with the nursing studies program. So every year I do a full day's training with midwife students, with public health nurses, and with A&E nurses as well. We also work, we do a program with social work students and with the Masters in Family Support. So that's something that how we kind of link in with NUIG on a yearly basis with those programs. I think what else do we do? A lot of accompaniment work, so we go to court with people, or like today, for example, I spent the afternoon in the guard station making a statement. So those kind of things are the feedback that we get from women. They're sort of very valued parts of the service, because it's very scary to do that by yourself. It's very scary to go to a courthouse and to face that, and when you don't understand the whole system, the system isn't very user friendly. So for us, because we're not emotionally involved in it, it's easier for us to be able to go with the woman and support her through that whole process. In the last year or two, we started to focus a lot on parenting. One of the things that we've noticed coming through the refuge, and I forgot to say, we have a very good childcare service in our refuge, where a lot of one-to-one work happens with the children, and we also provide play therapy for the kids there. But one of the things that we notice is the struggle in parenting in the context of domestic violence. So for example, when a woman leaves a violent or abusive relationship, her problems don't just end. And I think one of the stats that Women's Aid came out with a couple of years ago was that I think 75% of women still experience ongoing abuse post-separation, maybe right, something like that. It's quite high. And a lot of that abuse is done through children. So it can be done either dropping off children from access, picking up children from access, or even using the children to actually abuse, telling the children to abuse their mother. So that's something that we've been looking at very closely in the last year, and we've recently just completed designing a module to go in really to other professional services, so for example like social workers or family support services, because what we found was a lot of women were being told when they were having problems with the kids, oh, go off and do a parenting course. And while that's great, you go off and do a parenting course, it doesn't really tell you how to parent when the other parent is doing the complete opposite to you, so you don't have that kind of cooperation happening, and you're trying to parent. So we've looked at that closely and looked at ways that while you can't control what's happening from the other parent, you can look at ways to try and counteract that, and to also build up your own parenting skills and try to, I suppose what we would talk about is managing your partner contact more effectively, and not allowing that to invade your parenting and to have confidence in your own parenting. So that's one of the things that we looked at, and as part of that this year we have a group called SURF, and they're women who are ex-service users, and they're working on it and putting together a book. Well, it'll be like a booklet on advice for women who've been through what they've been through, and it's parenting tips as well. And we also have a student from the university who's doing a piece of research on parenting in the context of domestic violence. So that's kind of a new sort of role that we've chosen to take, because particularly in the outreach, I found that nearly every single woman that walked through the door that has children, it's a huge concern for them, and that's what they talk about. And often, and you know, the rest of the panel might agree, it's often a catalyst for women leaving an abusive relationship is when they begin to see the effect that it has on their children. So I think that's about it for me in terms of what we provide. Alan mentioned the stats from Safe Ireland, but one of the other ones that's very alarming for us last year was that 14 women per day tried to access refuge around the country and there was no space. So that's something that's also very, in the last couple of years has become very, very serious, is the lack of space in refuges, and that's to do with the housing crisis, because we cannot move people on. We actually have a family in the refuge now over a year. That's never been in our history. It's supposed to be crisis accommodation, but we can't move people on. So that in turn, then that blocks up the whole system, you know. So that's a real crisis for us, and one that's kind of hidden, you know, in terms of housing and homelessness. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Clare, Mahon, and I am the clinical nurse specialist in the sexual assault treatment unit here in Galway. I worked previously with domestic violence services. I was a support worker in Longford in the Women's Refuge, so I know a little bit about domestic violence, but I'm probably going to come at this from a sexual violence perspective. So I'll talk a little bit about national services, but mostly Galway, and just a few statistics about sexual violence. So I think when people talk about sexual violence, they think of sexual assault and rape, but I think it can be a lot more subtle than that. And I think that probably most women and some men have experienced sexual violence at some point in their life, whether it's like unwanted emails, unwanted comments, just subtle things like that, rather than full-on sexual assault. They say 1 in 4 women in Ireland will experience sexual violence in their lifetime, but I think the more subtle things everyone kind of experiences. So there's 6 sexual assault treatment units in Ireland. They're really a kind of a recent development. They were set up in 2008. They are supposed to be easily accessible, so they hope that everyone in this country is within 3 hours of a sexual assault treatment unit. So they're kind of dispersed evenly throughout the country. There's one in Dublin, Donegal, Galway, Cork, Waterside and Mullingar. And they all provide a 24-hour service, 365 days a year. So Galway SATU was set up in 2009. It's unique because we're the only sexual assault treatment unit in Ireland that provides a paediatric service as well. So we provide a forensic service for children under 14. That's the Child and Adolescent Sexual Assault Treatment Services, they're CSATs, and that's run by a paediatrician called Joanne Nelson. And then the sexual assault treatment unit sees people 14 years and older. So just some statistics from us from 2015. So we saw 97% of our patients were female and 3% were male. Nationally, 10% of patients are male, so I don't know why our figures are down, so we're hoping to do a little bit more work with men's groups to see. I think there's a little bit of underreporting in Galway of sexual violence towards men. 62.5% of people decided to have a forensic examination, and 72% had alcohol in the previous 12 hours. 67% of patients knew their assailant, and 25% were assaulted by a stranger. That's quite a high figure. We'd say roughly, usually from usually about 10% are stranger assaults. It's usually patients know their assailant. That can be a family member, a partner, ex-partner, a recent acquaintance, anything like that. 10% of patients in 2015 reported multiple assailants, and that's quite a high figure as well this year. And 42% of patients sustained physical injury. So I think this is an important statistic because a lot of our patients who come to us, they're in two minds about reporting to the Gardaí. They're not sure, and they say, well, I have no injuries, you know, there's no one else there, only me and him, I'm not sure whether anyone will believe me. But there's a lot of research out there that proves that it's not like you're just likely not to have an injury as have a physical injury after a sexual assault. This kind of fight, flight, or freeze when you come into a threatening situation. And some people do freeze, and that's totally normal. And your body will protect you against getting a serious injury. So we would tell patients quite normal not to have any physical injuries. Even if the case goes forward to court, if there is a physical injury or genital injury, the defence will argue that that can happen with consensual intercourse, and it can. So an injury doesn't really, strengthen or weaken the case. So we always tell patients that. We're based out in Hazelwood House in Parkmore, just beside Medtronic, beside the back entrance to the racecourse. And we're a private building, we have private parking around the back, so it's quite confidential. Anyone can refer to us, so anyone who wants to access the service, you can ring up, speak to me anytime between 8 and 4, Monday to Friday. You can be referred to the Gardaí. Rape Crisis Centre refers patients to us. We get referrals from GPs, we get referrals from social workers. Anyone can ring up and ask for an appointment. So these are just some of the services that we offer. So we offer a forensic service for patients who want to report to the Gardaí. So that's within 7 days. We can take forensic samples. We provide a health check for anyone who doesn't want to report to the Gardaí. And we need to respect people's decisions. It's totally up to the individual patient. Reporting to the Gardaí is a very difficult decision. It's not for everyone. So no matter whether you decide to report to the Gardaí or not, you'll still receive the same quality healthcare with us, and your decision will be respected. So from April 2016, so next month, we're hoping to bring in a new development. So we will be able to freeze samples. So if someone presents to us and they don't want to report to the Gardaí, at the minute we can't take any forensic samples because of continuity of evidence. We have to have a guard present. So we're hoping to change that. So from April, we're going to have a freezer installed. We can take samples and freeze them for up to 1 year. So that gives people a chance to decide whether they want to report or not. Because within 7 days, it's a very traumatic event. People have to make decisions about reporting, not reporting. There's lots of things going on. So this is a really good development, and it's going to be rolled out nationally. And it's kind of the gold standard. They're doing it in some European countries at the minute, and it's working really well. Our service is totally free, and it's fully confidential. So patients' notes will stay in our unit. We're very security conscious. Everything is locked, alarmed, everything like that. Patients are worried sometimes, if they go into UCHG or Merlin Park or anywhere for an appointment, maybe they're going to have a baby or they're going for any kind of appointment, that their sexual assault treatment unit notes will be part of their medical notes. But no, it's always separate. No one will ever know about their attendance if they don't want them to know. So we offer medications in sexual assault treatment units as well. We offer emergency contraception, we offer medications to prevent chlamydia and gonorrhea, we offer hepatitis B vaccinations, and we offer HIV prophylaxis if we feel it's needed. I think 6% of our patients last year received HIV prophylaxis. So these are just some tips, I suppose, if someone discloses to you that they've been sexually assaulted. So I think the main thing is just to always believe them. To say it's not your fault. I find patients that come to me, there's a lot of self-blame, and it's very difficult. So, just because you have alcohol on board, just because you went back to someone's house, just because you had a previous sexual relationship with this person, doesn't mean that you're to blame for them sexually assaulting you. You have the right to have a few drinks, go out, wear whatever you want, and no one has the right to sexually assault you. So, who to contact? So you can contact us, you can contact our SATU manager or me. I'm in the office most days on this number. You can find out more information about us on our website, www.hse.ie/SATU. or an out-of-hours forensic examiner can be contacted through the Gardaí. That will change in April, so that anyone who doesn't want to report to the Gardaí can also be seen out of hours. At the minute, people who aren't reporting are just being seen within office hours, but that's going to change in the next month, so that's a good development as well. I brought a forensic kit with me if anyone wants to see what the Garda kit is made of. It's just interesting, it's less scary than you can see what it is. And then this is just to finish up, I like this. Society teaches us don't get raped rather than don't rape. And I think that's very relevant for us. You know, the girls that come into us and men that come into us, they blame themselves. And I think there's been a lot of work done recently around consent workshops and things like that to try and change that. So that's really, you know, promising. So I hope that work continues. But I just like to say, like, I hope I'm approachable. So if anyone wants to ask me any questions at the end, or you know, wants to ever give me a ring if they have any queries or anything, anyone can call me anytime. And I think SATU is kind of a little known service in Galway, not many people know about it. So I'm just new in the role, so I'm hoping to change that and get out and kind of promote the unit. And that's it, really. Okay, thank you.
My name is Charlotte Douglas. I'm a specialist domestic violence consultant. I have just over 30 years experience within domestic violence and trauma. As well as being a consultant, I also work as a domestic violence specialist out of Longford Women's Link Domestic Violence Service. So I'm not going to go into what we do in Longford because Jackie's from here and this is your local service and everyone should refer in to Jackie straight away because they do great work. So domestic violence is very close to my heart, and I've spent, say about 30 years within the domestic violence sector one way or another. But for 19 years of that, I was actually a victim myself, and now I class myself as a survivor. So I spent 19 years within the domestic violence, a very serious domestic violence relationship. I've experienced every single type of domestic abuse there is, and I've survived. And because of what I've been through, and unfortunately where I lived at the time, the lack of services that were available, that spurred me on to get involved and actually work within the domestic violence sector to provide support for women. So this is really why I'm here today. I was asked to come in my consultancy capacity to do workshops around psychology and trauma within the domestic violence relationships and how the impacts on the victim. So I hope that everyone who came enjoyed them. I'm delighted to be here and thank the Psychology Society for inviting me. And it's been a great day. So I'll just end that now. I won't take any more time and open the floor to questions. Thanks.
Movable towel.
I'm just wondering, I mean, like, what next? I mean, I know you're trying to kind of advertise, like, in any of the services. I mean, what do you think is the next step to try to kind of move forward or raise awareness, or in general?
Well, I think education, and I know for myself, I know a lot of other services are doing a lot of TY, and we're trying to get into some national schools as well, on a more softer level, clearly. But I know I do a lot of TY workshops about healthy versus abusive relationships, and I think it really is important to get the education there in the beginning, so that if the awareness is there, then at least people are going to see the flags and the signs before they actually get caught up and become abused. So I'd say definitely education. And funding is always a good thing. But at the moment, domestic violence isn't a crime. Everybody in the domestic violence sector has been lobbying for years to try and get the government to change this. It's sort of in the long-term plan for cost in the next strategy. It can't come soon enough, because without it being a crime, there are no punishments. and at the moment victims are having to rely on domestic violence orders, and sometimes they don't get followed through correctly by the arresting agencies. So it's a huge barrier for any victim, whether male or female, to actually become safe. So I think the number one priority really is to make it a crime, and then everything will sort of fall into place. That's what I think anyway.
I think definitely from sexual violence as well, like education is like so important. So we're doing education in schools as well, and I know it's kind of relevant now, like the issue of consent in universities. They're doing teaching, and we're trying to bring that into secondary schools as well around TUI, and as well, like from a legal perspective, you know, we're trying to, you know, raise awareness like among the Gardaí and judiciary and stuff, you know, about dealing with these issues. So yeah, it's all education and funding. It's the same across the board.
Yeah, I think I would echo what everybody said so far about education and awareness. Sometimes I feel very hopeful, and you know, I look at things changing that I think are very connected, which are like gender-related things. Like I know there's been campaigns to stop, you know, boys and girls' toys being separate, and you know, and the Pink Stinks campaign and things like that. And I'm very hopeful when I see things like that. That the, you know, new generations growing up will, that, you know, that gender will be a much more fluid thing and much less kind of defined, that men should be this way and women should be that way. So I'm very hopeful when I see that, but then I get really dismayed when I see things like, you know, what happened in UCD recently, you know. So it's kind of like, it's like there's two extremes happening out there, and that's where education really comes into it, you know. So education and funding, I would echo that. But also that there shouldn't be such fear around, you know, coming forward and talking about things, and less of, you know, like what you were saying about the victim feeling guilty, that they're somehow to blame. And I think if you think about sexual violence and domestic violence, they're the two crimes where the victim does tend to get blamed. Like if somebody's walking down Shop Street and they get mugged, they don't really get blamed for that. But if you're a victim of either sexual violence or domestic violence, it tends to be, well, why didn't she leave him? Or why did she walk down that street? Or why was she wearing, you know, so I think that's something that really needs to change. I could go on, there's loads, so I better stop.
Well, education, we've brought it into schools, where we did projects in schools in the north side of Dublin with 9 schools there, a few primary schools. So we started in 6th class with consent and relational sort of stuff, family stuff, and then went right up to 6th year in the secondary school. Secondary schools with engaging the boys in the White Ribbon campaign. So they brought it to class, they discussed it in SPHE and those sort of things, and they wrote poetry and prose and so on. And we had a conference where they read out their poetry and prose, and stood up in front of 200 adults and read it all out. So we want to do more of that. It does come down to resources, both human and cash resources. And then, you know, I showed you the gathering of people who spoke at the event, but there were 200 people looking at them from all walks of life in Ireland on that day in Dublin. And our team between us, well, there were 2 of us, particularly myself and another guy, we did 12 events over the 16 days all around Ireland, including in Northern Ireland. Again, we were talking to similar size groups, and we would really like to bring the White Ribbon into colleges, so into NUIG, so if you're interested in that, come and talk to me afterwards. GMIT are very close to becoming a White Ribbon College. We have a whole checklist that they have to go through, a procedure. You get a flag then, and a ceremony so that it's publicised, you know, and that's going out into your local community then, that this is what's happening, this is what Galway City wants, to know the safety like this and the end of violence. So stuff like that, and also just to say that CUSC has a new national strategy on ending domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. So it's worth reading that and just seeing what the plans are, because most of us got to be part of the consultation on that and sit with CUSC and say what we wanted in it. It's not perfect, but there are good ideas in there, especially when the Gardaí, actually some of the stuff they were talking about yesterday, about how the Gardaí are going to be trained around dealing with domestic violence and be much more supportive in how they deal with it. So there are possibilities there, and I hope that all comes true and through.
Let me ask you something about this actually. You say that the Galway unit is the only one that had a paediatric facility. So if a child anywhere else in the country has issues with violence, are they sent to Galway or how are they done?
Yeah, it's really difficult. So 10th Street and Crumlin have a service, but it's not a forensic service. So they'll see children like who are victims of historical sexual violence, and they will do an examination, but they won't take forensic samples. So by the nature of child sexual abuse, usually most of the disclosures are after a period of time. So the amount of forensic examinations with children wouldn't be that many in comparison to historical disclosures. But yeah, Galway are the only unit in the country who are doing forensic examinations. So I think Dr. Nelson really is only contracted to take children within the Western region, but she's not going to turn her back on any child. So we are taking children from all over. So it's quite difficult. She is like actually at the minute our child services since last night are ceased because of their contracts are not renewed. It's quite difficult. So she feels like she's really against a wall because if she were to refuse, well say if somebody in Offaly, a child in Offaly was assaulted and they asked for a forensic examination in Galway, she would be within her rights to refuse, and that would cause public outcry, media outcry, and she probably would get more funding, and but she's not going to do that. She's not going to sacrifice one child's forensic examination just so that she can make a political point. So she's taken children from all over. I think there was like 13 counties last year she took children from. So yeah, Galway is kind of unique in that point. So they are seeing them in Dublin, but just not for forensics. Yeah. So
and when they introduced this system of freezing, where you said like these other hospitals that come in that do pediatric patients, will they be able to?
So the freezer is only for people that are over 18.
Oh.
Yeah. So because any person that comes to the sexual assault treatment unit under 18, we have to do a TUSLA referral. So we have to refer to social services and let the guards know. So we won't be able to freeze samples pending a later guard investigation. We'd have to let the guards know at that point that there was an allegation of a sexual offence against a child. So the freezer won't apply to anyone under 18. That's the only disadvantage to it. So we won't be freezing paediatric samples. And hopefully the CASAT service, the contracts and everything will be sorted out, and hopefully it will be up and running again in the coming weeks.
Just in refer to what you said there, Clare, I was just wondering who is funding the centre? Is it completely government-based health service?
Yeah, so it's the HSE, and then for any forensic cases that we do, the Department of Justice pay for that part. They pay for the forensic service, but the HSE pays for everything else. Yeah, so sometimes we get like small donations from people, but yeah, no, it's mostly HSE. We have budgetary constraints as well. But,
the contract problem you have, is that funding related or just?
Yeah, it's kind of complicated. It's like nobody wants us. No one wants a sexual assault treatment unit. So at the minute, the child services are under primary care, so community care, and it's not really appropriate. They want to be under acute hospital services. So no one is really taking responsibility for them at the minute, and they're in negotiations, and no one is willing to provide funding to the child services. I don't know if you remember back in early January, there was kind of a little bit of a media storm about it in front of the Irish Times, and Dr. Nelson kind of spoke on it. I think everyone is getting tired now, it's like there was that little media storm, and then they were promised, yes, your contracts, everything will get sorted out. They had a deadline of the 28th of February, 29th of February, nothing was sorted. It's hard to keep the energy going, to keep fighting, Just, I think child sexual abuse isn't a priority at the minute. And then you have the new government coming in, so who do you ask at the minute, So it's just difficult at the minute. So at the minute there's no child forensic services in the country, which is, yeah, it is shocking, yeah.
We talk about Waterside House and the amount of people that were turned away because you didn't have facilities for them. And are there plans for building more facilities, or
We have a new refuge. We've got the site on, do you know where City Hall is? It's the old, ironically, it's the old Magdalen Laundry. There's a lot of mixed feeling about that in Galway, because historically, you know, personally I think it's great. I think it's payback time. The laundry itself is gone, but the convent building, we have the building over a year, but there's been huge hold up in terms of planning permission, and you know, because it's kind of a heritage site as well, so we have to look at what we have to keep and all of that. But we're hoping that's nearly through. We're nearly through planning stages, so we're hoping that the building will start, you know, by the end of this year at least, and we'll be in it, you know, in a year and a half's time, 2 years' time. So that will be expanded to 9 self-contained units. We only have 6 at the moment. The idea would be that they would be more like little apartments, and that the women would be much more independent, but supported. You know, there'd always be. We are the only 24-hour refuge, by the way, in the Western region. You know, so that's important as well, that there is at least one refuge where there are staff on at night time. You know, so that people, you know, because often trouble happens at 3 o'clock in the morning. So that they're the plans for the refuge. But it still won't solve the housing crisis. You know, housing is really at crisis level, as we know, all across the country. And when someone arrives at our door and we can't accommodate them, if they arrive in the middle of the night, they will be given a bed on the sitting room floor. We've never turned somebody away. And then the next morning, whatever staff is on duty would ring around the country and see if we can get refuge somewhere else. Now, you're probably aware of this as well, Charlotte. Women don't always want to move if their kids are in school locally, or you know, they just can't. You know, so that's where the outreach service, where I would step in then and work with supporting the woman while she's at home. So the first priority, if there has been physical abuse, would be looking at a safety plan. You know, and recently. MOVE has set up in Galway as well. I'm on the steering committee for the local MOVE group, which is Men Overcoming Violent Emotions, and that they'll be running a 26-week programme for perpetrators of domestic violence. So we're kind of hoping, and there's a contact partner agency as well, that all of those supports will help families where violence is a problem. Now, I have some cynicism sometimes still. Too long in this word, not have it, you know, about the effects of the programme on everybody. You know, obviously, I think it's like anything. It's like, you know, if you have a problem with alcohol, if you don't admit it and do something about it, somebody else can. So if somebody's told to go to a programme and they don't believe that they've got a problem, then nothing will change. You know. And I do still feel, and maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned in thinking this, but I do think that it needs to be made, I agree with Charlotte, it needs to be a crime. Because there needs to be some kind of deterrent, and I often use the analogy of, like, you know, seatbelts or drink driving. When it was totally acceptable to drink and drive in this country, people did it all the time. And then the law changed, and then the law was enforced, and then attitudes followed that, you know, so I think that's the way to go with domestic violence, as far as I'm concerned. You know, I don't know if the rest of the panel.
Absolutely. And I mean, the good thing about those law changes that would work for domestic violence as well is that, I mean, if I think of the amount of times I've been stopped at a checkpoint with the guards, it's only a couple of times, but I would never drink drive because I don't want to get caught. And that's the thing, we want to make sure that men don't want to get caught.
And it's socially unacceptable as well,
Yes.
now to drink and drive.
Yes.
You know, so that is changing attitudes.
Does anybody know why it's taking so long to go through? What is hold up the legislation?
Well, if you go back to the 1980s, when Don Hennessy did a great amount of work with implementing the Duluth model, and he was very high up in government, talking to high up government agencies. It was all set in motion. And if you talk to Don now, all of a sudden overnight his funding was cut. And it was because one civil servant didn't like him and funding was cut, and it reversed everything. Now that's Don's take on it. I haven't seen any evidence proving wrong. be honest. I think it's been socially acceptable for so long. Unfortunately, it's been always been on the back burner. It's always been the carrot to dangle in front of women's groups and other people working on the front line to keep them going and going, while all the time the men are seems they're cutting the budgets and cutting the resources. And we see in different countries it's a crime. And there's a very set protocol with emergency services, with the policing, and there's a very clear punishment for those crimes. I don't know why the reason is that in this country it's taken so long for this societal change to happen. Because it's okay making it a crime, but the punishment has to fit the crime as well. And if you don't have the judiciary and the Gardaí acting appropriately, then there's no point in making it a crime. Do you know? So hopefully things will change when the new government comes in. We hope so. Cost of it in the second part of the strategy now. Hopefully it will be implemented, but unfortunately these things take time. But I think this has taken too long. Way too long.
I think, sorry if I just, you don't mind me, I think you're right. I think political will has an awful lot to do with it, and I'm always very struck by the whole issue of gender. It's not something people are comfortable discussing. It's very unpopular. And what it really struck me, I don't know if any of you remember this, a couple of years ago, Trócaire had an ad, and it was about gender-based violence across, other countries, where there's sex selection abortion, or there's, in some countries where boy children will be fed over girl children, and they had this ad anyway highlighting sort of the plight of women sort of worldwide, and it had to be pulled because there were so many complaints about it. And I think for me that said a lot about where we're at in terms of there's a huge defensiveness. It saddens me greatly, but there's a huge defensiveness when you talk about violence against women. There's an immediate response of, what about men? And while we absolutely know that men are victims too, and nobody's denying that, it's the wrong way to go about it, to have this sort of two polarised kind of approaches to it. And it's the same with sexual violence as well, So political will does have a lot to do, but hopefully with new strategies and with young people and people like yourselves, wanting to raise awareness and the stuff that's been done in schools, really important, I think.
With the new strategy has an action plan attached to it, and that's really important. If you're ever in strategy or policy work or trying to get something like that happening at government level, make sure there's an action plan attached to it. And that's really important around women's policies and strategies, because there is a national, it's over now, there's going to be a new one, the National Women's Strategy. There was no action plan put with it, and it was just put up on the shelf, and very little happened. So you've got to make sure there's an action plan that's accepted and it's agreed. But Jackie's absolutely right about the gender thing. I'm on the Gender Mainstreaming Committee in the National Women's Council of Ireland, and we've been working for 4 years. The HSE funded us to prepare a gender mainstreaming training program for the HSE. They haven't adopted it. And we were just at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, we were just discussing it. The minute you mention the word gender, it's considered to be about women. And then if it's mostly male middle managers that would have to take on this program, and they just, the shutters go down. So we've actually now put together a sentence sort of addressing women's and men's health needs equally, and that's the sentence we're now going in with, so that they see there's men there and it doesn't have the word gender in it. I mean, it's actually that. And I mean, that's been going on for years. I was volunteering this work in the 80s, and a teacher rang me up from Wexford, and she said, we've got a gender equality group here, and every time, we've got a teachers group here, and one of the issues to deal with every month is gender, but every time gender comes up, the men go out for a smoke. Say, we leave you girls to it. So it's the exact same, So it's just, you've got to be strategic around language as well, to trick men. We've been conditioned in a particular way to react to these things, and you've got to trick that conditioning. so that we go, oh yeah, that's a good idea, before we know that it's actually going to be that we have to develop, you know.
We found the same with the consent workshops we were running. It's just the men automatically assumed it was going to be, what are you doing?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
like both workshops were the same, the female and the male ones, you know, it's just kind of hard to change that.
And once they've done the workshop, where they
Oh,
get
there's
it.
life, there's always
Yeah,
hilarious,
exactly,
it's always
yeah,
great. And the
yeah.
only reason it's even separate is just it might be easier to talk about
Yes.
these things in front of, you know,
Yeah.
women or just men. And that's the only reason.
It was only being piloted, so they wanted to test
And you
what it was
piloted
like.
here to do
Yeah.
NUIG. Brilliant.
Yeah, and the post-doc researchers and a couple of them now. They all loved them, they were great,
Yeah.
but again, it's probably the people that attended them probably didn't mean that they just came for
I would
it's
say
nice, yeah.
every man should go to one event. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's definitely an eye-opener. Even the girls that were in it as well were very much like, oh, right, you know,
Yes.
there's so much people, it's just like with domestic violence, people have this one image in their head and they think that's what it is, you know, and
Yeah.
so much more than that.
Well, I think that's important, actually. I'm glad you said that, because, you know, even I'm not always happy with the term domestic violence
Yeah,
anymore,
yeah.
because it conjures up images of older women with children, and actually it's abusive relationships,
That's the
you
word
know.
domestic kind of violence,
Yes,
you know,
yeah, yeah.
violent, you know,
Yeah,
whatever, you know.
Because we know it's happening in young people's relationships, you
Yeah.
know, we know it's happening from a very young age, and we know, because also, like Charlotte was saying, we go into schools as well, and it's amazing the reactions to different schools as well. You know, I personally am completely against separate sex schools. I don't know why in this day and age where, you know, we're raring, you know, educating children separately, I think is for a start is saying a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, but we would notice, I don't know if you noticed that, if you went to single sex schools as opposed to,
It's very different.
it's so
I actually
different.
prefer doing the mixed.
Yeah.
You get a much better response.
Yeah.
There's a much higher level
Yeah.
of awareness and
Yeah.
understanding
It's
around dating
healthier.
abuse
yeah.
with the mixed classes, definitely.
Well, we'd have a lot of censorship as well at schools, things that you can and can't say around
Yeah.
sexual assault. And sometimes your talk is so censored, you can just about introduce yourself. And
Yeah.
so then, what's the point then? You're just, you know, like, you're not getting to have a realistic chat with the students. Or, you know.
On a positive note, though, we at least were being allowed into schools. I remember back when we weren't, and it was a huge battle, you know, to get in the door of the
We're
schools.
just like, oh, we don't want to talk about it to kids. Like,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, I think the times change.
Yeah.
Just before you say that, hello. Before you go, will you go on the White Ribbon website and make this commitment here and get a white ribbon for yourself and wear it? Thanks a million.
How about the green ribbon?
Pardon?
How about the green ribbon?
What with the green?
Oh, you can get one of them as well, but I don't know whose campaign that is.
Yeah, I was just wondering, with the, you know, the ease of access of the internet, do you find that there's been a change in the type of difficulties that people are having? Because it's so immediate.
Yeah, there is a big rise in digital abuse, most definitely, particularly around the TY age. That's why I'm sort of aiming at going into TY, because, you know, I like to get awareness in there about, you know, exactly the control and power and everything around giving out, you know, giving access to passwords and things like that, you know, and do a lot of work around revenge porn and, you know, all the different agencies you can go to get help about taking revenge porn down. And but even things like spyware is a huge increase, and I know in the service that I work for, I've seen it. I'm just a digital safety officer, and I've seen a huge increase in the amount of tracking devices being used on women's cars, cloning, phones, spyware on phones. Spyware is so easy to get. It's a lot majority it's free, and you don't, because it runs in stealth mode. You don't know that it's on your phone, but then all of a sudden you're going home and your abuser's telling you exactly where you've been that day, text messages you've done, because it can see into everything in your laptop and into your phone, and they can see even if you phone anybody, if it's a refuge or a support service, they can tell you exactly what time you phoned and everything. So this really freaks me out. You know, it could be something as simple as having your location service turned on Facebook on your app. 50% of the TUI workshops that I do anyway is about raising awareness and around keeping safe while you're online. And if you do find that you're coming across some problems, then these are the ways to go to help solve that problem. But yeah, unfortunately, it's a very big thing. And I think that's mainly because the internet has made all these different spyware devices so easily accessible now, whereas before it used to be something you used to see in a movie or something, but now you can buy anything off eBay.
I suppose as well in the sexual assault unit, we're seeing a lot of patients presenting to us like from online dating sites, Tinder, Grindr, Plenty of Fish, things like that. And like whereas there are a lot of young people, we kind of have a new phenomenon as well of women probably maybe in their late 40s, early 50s who've been in long-term relationships and maybe the relationship has broken down and they want to get back on the dating scene. Maybe their daughter or their friend is saying, you know, why don't you go on Tinder or whatever, and they're probably a little bit more naive because they've been in a long-term relationship for years and they're really vulnerable to predators online. You know, so yeah, online it's really complex, you know, and yeah, like going to people's houses when they've never met them before, things like that, and like that's acceptable now. You know, for young people, like a lot of my friends would say if they're meeting someone on Tinder, they'd say, oh, I got held up at work, do you want to just come over and watch a DVD? Things like this, you know, and you just think, are you really going to go to his house? You've never even met him. They're like, oh, I've been chatting to him for 2 or 3 weeks, you know? So it is kind of, it's really difficult, yeah. And then, yeah.
Pornography is a disaster for men, absolute disaster. It's a disaster for the women who are in it as well. But it disconnects us from ourselves. It disconnects us from empathy, from feelings, from being able to relate properly to women. It objectifies women. It's a ruination of our sexuality. You know, it's a dreadful thing, absolutely dreadful, and it can be incredibly addictive. So it's really important to discourage men from watching it. It's really important to discourage boys, young boys, and adolescent boys. It's a huge problem because all the search engines carry it. You know, it's instant. It's almost in your face. You know, before you even switch on your computer, the stuff coming up sometimes. So it's a major problem. But men, we really need to start telling each other to stop looking at it. You know, it's really bad for us. Really bad for us. So that's very isolating for us as well. So it's bad for us, it's bad for you, it's bad for the relationships between us. You know. And it contributes to all the issues we're talking about. I mean, the women who've exited prostitution just say that the men who buy them come in and they want them to say, look, I saw this last night on the internet, I want you to do that, whatever it is, you know. So, sickening stuff.
I think that's happening as well with younger people, probably like a generation ago, they didn't have the access to porn when at that young age, and now it's skewing their perception of what a real relationship is. And there's massive pressure on young teenage girls now to act in a way that young boys are watching on the internet. You know, and these young boys kind of have, because they have never had a sexual relationship before, and they're seeing this is their first experience of sex. And then when they meet girls, they're expecting this from them, and they're totally skewed in their views of a normal sexual relationship.
When I read this last somewhere, I think the addiction just keeps going. So even if somehow you've met a couple of girls who will do whatever, like it's never going to be enough. You constantly need to go once or whatever.
And also it's the men who get addicted look for harder and harder porn, you know, more extreme, more violent. So it gets worse, and then they're expecting that in their relationships with women as well.
I think you said over 85,000 men play sex a year. So like that would suggest to me maybe, I won't say culture, but there's a lot of people that think it's okay to do it, you know. So I mean, as well as criminalising it, which would make it more taboo in society, you know, and not to be done. I think it would, like, we have to go into schools as young as possible age to educate them. That's not right. I mean, are you able to do that? Like, or I mean, who calls the shots on that if he wanted to say, I'm on a campaign to go in and educate young boys?
Well, what we do is, it's very different to go into a school and say, hey, we want to talk about ending prostitution, because the staff think we're introducing the idea of prostitution to the boys and the young men. But what we do is go in and talk about the White Ribbon Campaign on violence against women, and we include it then as part of, as one example of violence against women. The other thing about it is they've had this law in Sweden, of course, for over 10 years, and they did a survey before they changed the law, and 80% of men in Sweden of all ages thought that, 80% of young men at that stage in Sweden thought that it was okay to buy women for sex. And now, only 20% of young men think that 10 years later. So they actually have a result. And it's generally, for the whole population, it's just taken, you couldn't do that. How could you buy another human being for sex? When you think about it, it's an absolutely mad and savage idea, So they've got that now. That society goes, you're crazy, you can't be selling people or buying people for sex, that's madness. So that's luckily now entrenched in the society. And it's a bit like, it's funny, I remember my dad saying to me, never hit a woman. And I was like, he rarely said things like that. But it's just like I got that in my culture then, growing up. And I knew most dads carried that and said it to their sons. And when in those days when your dad said something to you, you took it on board, and you didn't question it. That was the thing, it just went straight in, right, don't do that. Now obviously it didn't always work. But it's something like having that, there's work to be done to entrench those things back into the cultures.
But I think that example you gave of Sweden is a great example of how the law comes first and then attitudes will change.
It's mad that there's such a difference if you wouldn't buy someone to work in the garden, but buy someone to
It's a crazy idea. Can I say just one thing to the two guys, to the same as those guys? So if you go on the whiteribbon.ie website,
I'm not going anywhere, but I would definitely.
all right, just to get on and take that commitment and get yourself you get a much neater one than this. White ribbon, I just wear this one so it can be clearly seen. And then if you have men that you can pin a ribbon on, do the same. Get yourself a ribbon and pin them on them, and or put them onto the website.
I brought along some leaflets just because it's a local service, and one of them is called the relationship checklist, and it can be stuck on the back of doors. And what's good about it is it doesn't say domestic violence, it just says how is your relationship, and it's like a checklist. So I'm going to leave some.
Great.
And I've got white ribbon posters there as well.
I'd like to say an absolutely massive thank you to everyone that came today and our speakers for travelling. We're going to be having food outside now for everyone. On top of that, there have been some really, really important issues brought up, and we will put everyone's contact information for their services on our Facebook page as well. And everyone go to the website, White Ribbon, and make the pledge. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.